And welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and certified coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Ending Burnout Through Structure, Not Gimmicks. Jessie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Tell us what your latest article is about.
So it's about really the science of burnout, and we know all these things and we don't do them. And so we often say it's a systems issue, but we can't fix it. And what can we do? And I was asked by a client who had been on a retreat. She was asked to give a talk to her emergency room colleagues about what helps with burnout and what actually can they do. And so that was where this came from. And what was the science and what really worked? And was there anything that they could do? And so in sharing that with her, it's super important that we address the structural stuff, and it has to be addressed. And I don't think we can fix burnout without addressing that. And we also have to address some of the other things that we know scientifically. We've done all these studies on burnout for years and years that do help. And yet we often don't do those while waiting for the other. And so what we've really found is we don't do a whole lot. We just study it. And so the invitation of the article is really, what do we know? What can we do? What's in our control? What's not in our control? And maybe, what can we do first and how can we layer it so things actually begin to change?
So let's start with some of the evidence that we're talking about. So what are some of the evidence-based practices that you've seen in studies that help with burnout?
Well, mindfulness, there's tons of studies that a mindfulness practice helps with burnout. And
what is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, so mindfulness, it can be a mindfulness practice, so it can be meditation, but it can also be anything that really works on your nervous system, upregulating your parasympathetic nervous system. I think many people think mindfulness is hard, and it doesn't have to be hard. And so most of the studies are actually done on true meditation or mindfulness. And the studies show 12 minutes because that's what they picked to study. But I think most people believe that any minutes is better than no minutes, and it's more of a dose effect, not that you could meditate all day and heal your burnout. And the reason for this is not that you can meditate away your burnout or make all the problems go away. But when you upregulate your parasympathetic nervous system, you have more agency and control over your response to what's happening and choosing to respond to things that are in your control and not in your control, and respond rather than react, and also the agency to make other decisions that make things better for you. And so I like to think of mindfulness not strictly as meditation, because there are a lot of studies about forest bathing, which is mindfulness, and how it impacts your physiology, and sound healing and yoga and all of these things. And it isn't that a yoga class or a meditation practice will fix things, but we have science to show that it helps you as an individual and it's in your control.
So when you talk about meditation, I've heard downloading an app, perhaps.
Yeah.
Would that count?
It counts. And I often tell people, don't make it hard. If you don't know meditation, download an app, pick the 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, hit play and do what they say. It's better than nothing. And I think what people find is the more they do it, they then begin to understand what it feels like to be mindful and how that feels different than their usual state of being. And what I like to say is it's not the answer to burnout, but when we each change, then we're capable of advocating in more effective ways for the structural changes that are needed, or we're capable of being the leaders who are then able to make those structural human changes. And yes, burnout won't go away without them. And I think that was what was critical to bring up in this study, that, if we don't change moral injury, burnout is not going to go away, but we have to start somewhere.
All right. So what other evidence-based practices are you?
There's lots of evidence around coaching and how physician coaching decreases burnout, improves quality of life. And there's quite a few randomized controlled trials. And those have now been done in residencies, beyond residency, in lots of different settings, and with lots of different programs. And so we know that work to sort of reprogram the way you think and the way you respond in a more intentional way than just mindfulness and pausing and creating space does create change. And the way I like to think about that as well is when we are our healthier selves, professional athletes have coaches so that they can respond in complex, challenging situations. we can respond to this complex, challenging situation that medicine is very strategically. And that's how we'll be able to lead effectively and advocate for change effectively. And maybe even, change our own situations in big and small ways so that we are less burnt out and we have more capacity to advocate and even mandate changes that are necessary for safety, for example. And the last bit that I think we sometimes forget is lifestyle medicine. And there's
Hmm.
this huge trend in lifestyle medicine for patients. But if we don't sleep as physicians, we will suffer from burnout and be more burnt out at much higher rates. If we don't eat healthy, same thing. If we don't move, same thing. Mindfulness and stress reduction are also part of lifestyle medicine. And then the connection and community piece is really important. In medicine, so many of us are in our silos because expectations
Hmm.
are so overwhelming and we feel alone and we feel like we don't belong for many reasons. And so just getting back to those basics, the same things that we advocate for our patients, making sure they apply to ourselves equally can make a huge difference in burnout. And again, all of those things, we have science around those things. We know they make us healthier. We know they make us, I do not like the word more resilient, but they make us able to respond better
Hmm.
to challenging situations. And they won't heal burnout, but without them, we can change the system and things won't change for us either. And then the other piece here is really culture change. And culture change can't happen if we aren't changing the culture ourselves. And each and every one of us, like if we aren't taking care of our own lifestyle medicine and our own health and wellness, the culture doesn't change if we don't expect that of others. But none of us can do that from that burnt out place. So the science really comes down to there's a lot more science on the personal changes because most of the structural changes have not been made yet,
Hmm.
to be fair. There are lots of new sort of pilot programs that are being studied. And of course, if you have a reasonable expectation of the amount of work you can do and a reasonable expectation of the number of patients you can do, and of course, if you're not charting at home, and of course, if we're not being blamed for things that are out of our control, we will have less burnout. But those studies really haven't been done because we haven't gotten there yet.
So it sounds like it doesn't have to be an either or situation, right? There are some individual things that physicians can do to help with burnout, like you mentioned, mindfulness, lifestyle medicine, and coaching. And we don't have to just wait for these structural changes to help improve burnout. So I just want to explicitly say that because a lot of people say that it's just structural changes that is the most effective in terms of reducing burnout. So you're saying that there's some evidence suggesting that there are some things that we can do individually as physicians to help as well.
And that those, I personally believe, are what's going to lead to the structural changes. Because when we as physicians are healthier and have more capacity to advocate strategically and have more room to be thoughtful and creative, that's where some of these structural changes will ultimately happen. I do think also the cultural piece, which comes ultimately out of that individual piece, right? We're all responsible for the culture in medicine. Sometimes we say it comes from above, but it also comes from within.
Hmm.
And if we each change, that culture will begin to change. And when the tides shift and we're all not willing to accept certain things, then structural changes happen.
And when you say structural changes, are we talking about things like AI scribes to decrease the burden of
Yes.
documentation and seeing fewer patients, more time? What kind of structural changes are we talking about
It's
specifically?
literally all of
Yeah.
those. I think we're actually getting there or almost there with AI scribes. It hasn't been implemented everywhere, but people have seen a tremendous shift. And one of the things I notice is that we used to always say, well, the better physicians are the ones who get their charts done and chart and see patients at the same time. And now that there's AI, people are saying, oh no, actually, you use AI and you focus on the patients, and that is how you don't have burnout. And so that's an example of how maybe we were gaslit in the past with those statements, and yet structural changes prove things that we already knew. So definitely AI scribes, and I'm sure there's a lot of other AI inventions and innovations that are going to help medicine tremendously. I think reasonable human expectations for how many patients we can see and how much time it takes to see a patient, and perhaps even that that old adage that like putting in the time up front, longer, perhaps primary care appointments might avoid more illness and avoid more specialty care, and in the long run, save money. It's the challenge is that medicine has become a business, and so it's being run by business people and not medical people. But those structural changes where we acknowledge that physicians are human and have human needs and human capacity about how much call they can take and how many patients they can see, and a real acknowledgement about, what's our responsibility and what responsibility could be done by others. And I also like to think about our training and what we're trained to do and what others are trained to do. That seems to have gotten a bit muddled
Mhm.
over time. And so clear structural change where we're really looking at efficiency and optimization, but from a human standpoint, not from a more is better, because we know that more is not better.
Now, for those healthcare administrators who may be listening to
Mhm.
you, there may be a cynical perspective saying that if there's so much evidence saying that individual changes can't help with burnout, why do we have to make structural changes? So, for your advice to these healthcare administrators who may be listening to you, what would you like to see them do?
Yeah, it's because it's not an either or, they
Yeah.
have to be together. So
Mhm.
if as physicians we take care of ourselves and the system doesn't change, it won't work. And if the system changes and we don't take care of ourselves, it won't work. It's because it's such a complex interrelated system. But the changes that need to be made at a systemic level are this reasonable human expectations of what's possible, and also having physicians be responsible only for things that are actually in their control and they can take responsibility for. And so, really changing the way we look at what is good medicine and our ultimate decision that, it has to be done in a way that meets cost, or it has to be done in a way that meets these things. A lot of the things in medicine don't fit into business. And so, if healthcare administrators can really look at medicine as this unique and special entity, and how can we make it work, it's going to be different than your usual business economics.
Because I'm sure that you're going to anticipate what they're going to say, right? It's, why do we have to spend millions to get an AI scribe? Or you can't afford to see fewer patients because of financial constraints. It's probably easier just to tell everyone to download a meditation app, right? So
Yeah.
are you hearing that type of response?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially right now, because it's like, well, there are budget issues and we're losing funding and we're losing this. And so there's really a lot more pressure on physicians to not do the things that help them. But I would say they can't afford not to.
Hmm.
And the retention issues are really where we're getting into trouble. And so if they can't afford to do this, they're not going to have physicians, or they're going to have to spend the money on hiring new doctors and churning through the churn, which is very, very expensive. And so it's so expensive to train a doctor and onboard a doctor that making some of these systemic changes, ultimately, it's a little bit like preventive care in medicine, right?
Hmm.
Like saves you a lot of money down the line. And so we really, I think, have to think structurally in an innovative way. And what I've just seen over the years is we just pass the buck down. We can't do it now because there's a pandemic. We can't do it now because there's financial hardship. We can't do it now because we don't have whatever. There's
Hmm.
always a reason. And then we're not making headway into this burnout. And yet we have science to show what helps. I do think that there are some programs now that are being trialed and piloted to show that they do help with burnout. So hopefully we'll have some more science around that. But I also think that in medicine, we always wait for the science and we cause a lot of human suffering
Hmm.
in our systems. I don't think that anybody can argue that having not human expectations of humans doing a job is reasonable. And the skyrocketing rates of burnout show that.
So, just to be clear, for those individual physicians, we need to take responsibility as well. So, give us the message that you would like to say to these physicians who say, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to find a coach. I'm too busy. I'm seeing too many patients. I have a family to take care of. So, what's your message to the physicians who simply say they don't have the time
They
for some of
don't
these
have
evidence-based approaches?
they don't have time not to, is
Mhm.
what I would say, right? The cost of when you're burnt out, you're reactive and you
Yeah.
tend to have relationship problems. You have problems interacting with your kids. Your patient satisfaction scores are worse. Your efficiency is worse. And so while we are trained in medicine to push through and do more and more and more, and actually we are becoming less efficient. And so what I see is people who are mindful actually provide better care, higher quality of care, lower cost of care. They have lower readmissions. There are studies to show this, and this actually is also evidence for the um, why organizations should be paying attention and should fund this and support this and give physicians time. Like if they're going to do nothing structural, they could at least support this and fund it and make sure physicians have ways to access coaches and mindfulness tools, not just here, download this app and fit it in negative time, but how can we work together to make these things happen? But I think the other way I like to think about it for individual physicians is if nothing else, it's going to make it better for you right now. And so if you want to sit and wait for organizations to change, you're going to be miserable in the process. And if you really care about yourself and your family and your patients and your teams and your colleagues and the culture of
Mhm.
medicine, taking some of this individual approach is going to help. And it ultimately is what's going to help you advocate effectively. I think that so many of this it is so many people are not advocating effectively because they're burnt out, because they don't have
Yeah.
time, because they're not mindful. And then we don't make change and we sit in this spiral. And so this can be the first step to sort of unwinding the snarled yarn ball, if you will. And if nothing else, you benefit.
Yeah.
I think we say you can't create time, but mindfulness creates time. Coaching creates time. Notice how more efficiently we tend to move through our day if we've exercised or if we've eaten healthy, how you feel different, you have more energy. So I think really thinking the opposite, we don't have time not to. Same message for organizations who don't have enough money to do this. I would say it's going to cost you a lot more not to.
Mhm. We're talking to Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Ending Burnout Through Structure, Not Gimmicks. Jessie, let's end with take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
So there's science about burnout, and it's both individual and structural. We can't do just one, things won't change, but also that we must start doing something rather
Mhm.
than just waiting for the other person to, or other pockets to make the change. That there are things that each pocket can do. And really, if we do nothing, take no action, nothing will change.
Jessie, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.